Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into the 2025 Miami-Dade College Presidential Dialogue. Now, this event, it might sound like just another academic conference on the surface, but what we've pulled out is, well, it's like a rapid-fire geopolitical masterclass all packed into a single day.
It really was something. It happened on Wednesday, November 12th, 2025, right there at the Wilson campus. And this thing is an annual forum. Yeah. It's designed as this direct channel for global leaders, former presidents, thinkers to talk directly with students, faculty, the community, just the, sheer concentration of influence in that one room.
Yeah.
It tells you a lot about the stakes involved.
Absolutely. And the mission, it was very specific this year. They wanted to analyze the really pressing challenges, but also the opportunities facing the Western Hemisphere right now. They
Right.
kind of boiled it down to three key themes.
Right.
Boosting civic participation,
Right.
maintaining institutional integrity, that's a big one, and figuring out global cooperation in this, well, pretty turbulent era.
Yeah. And for anyone, you know, trying to follow the complexities of democracy in the Americas, this event was it was a unique chance to get an unfiltered look. You weren't just hearing theories, you were hearing like practical, tactical discussions from people who've actually been in charge, people who really understand how fragile those institutional frameworks can sometimes be.
Let's talk about who was actually there, because the sheer density of participants, that's the first thing that really jumps out. It needs some context. The geographical reach alone. I mean, you had people from Spain all the way down to the Southern Cone, the Caribbean. It just shows these problems they're tackling, they're systemic, right? Not just isolated
And
issues.
what's really striking, I think, is the political diversity. I mean, we're talking about a range of ideologies you just rarely see gathered in one place, especially focused on a common challenge like democratic resilience.
So, the big names. 9 former heads of state. Now, instead of just rattling off a list, let's think about the representation. You had Jose Maria Aznar from Spain, which is key, right? That transatlantic link. But then also leaders like Laura Chinchilla from Costa Rica.
Exactly. And significantly, you had former presidents from places like Paraguay, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic. It really shows this kind of unified regional concern. But if you want, like, the perfect example of the political tension potentially in that room, look at Colombia. You had two former Colombian presidents there, Andres Pastrana and Alvaro Uribe.
Wow, okay. That is a remarkable lineup. And I have to ask, did the dialogue actually get into how such, distinct voices, sometimes really politically opposed voices, find common ground? Especially on something like institutional integrity. I mean, those two individuals you just mentioned, Pastrana and Uribe, they represent incredibly complex, sometimes conflicting views of Colombia's recent past.
Well, that tension, that's precisely what made the event so insightful, I think. It showed that, look, while policy choices and political leanings might differ sharply, often there's a shared baseline, a kind of non-negotiable commitment to the structures, the rules of the game that ensure transfers of power, checks and balances. So the focus became less about specific policy and maybe more about the process itself.
Right.
Mhm.
Which really underlines the point. This wasn't just abstract theory floating around. This was, like you said, tactical discussion. How do you maintain these governance structures when they're under serious pressure?
Okay, so moving beyond the former presidents, the executive branch folks, here's where it gets really interesting, where the conversation widened out quite a bit. The organizers clearly made sure this wasn't just a closed circle of past political power.
Yeah, that was crucial. Bringing in other voices, it challenges assumptions, right? They included Nobel laureates, top academics, and importantly, human rights advocates. That really diversifies and deepens the way you look at democratic systems. Specifically, bringing in Maria C. Machado, noted as the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, that immediately raises the stakes, doesn't it? It frames the whole discussion around human rights, political freedom, in these very personal, non-governmental terms.
Oh, absolutely. When you put the experience of a former president who's maybe dealt with, say, economic crises right next to the experience of a human rights advocate like Machado,
Yeah.
or other activists they had like Rosa Maria Paya and Berta Valle, who often work outside the formal system, well, the whole idea of institutional integrity suddenly gets a lot more complex.
Yeah.
And necessary complexity, I'd argue.
And you also had that specialized academic view, right? Like Andres Malamud from the University of Lisbon, providing that scholarly framework maybe on how democratic backsliding actually happens in Latin America, what the patterns are.
And we can't forget the institutional heavyweight they brought in. Luis Almagro, the former Secretary General of the Organization of American States, the OAS Almagro showing up, his presence, it kind of framed the whole conversation within that larger context of regional agreements, multilateral efforts, the collective security of democracy across the Americas.
So Almagro, his specific input really highlighted this intense, ongoing struggle in the region for peace, for justice, for democratic resilience. When you connect all these dots, the presidents, the Nobel winner, the former OAS chief, you start to see they were really articulating a kind of shared threat model.
And what's fascinating there, I think, is what they identified as the main threat. Their collective insights seemed to move beyond the sort of traditional fear, maybe, of a military coup. Instead, there was this almost universal agreement that the biggest threat facing the hemisphere now is something you might call the administrative coup.
The administrative coup. That's a powerful phrase. What exactly does that mean in the context of what they were all saying?
Well, it refers to the slow, kind of legalistic gutting of institutional checks and balances. So it's not tanks rolling down the streets. It's more like legislative overreach or politicizing independent courts or systematically using regulatory bodies to go after political opponents. These are tactics of democratic erosion, but they're often wrapped in this cloak of legality, which makes them, much harder to spot and fight publicly.
Okay, so that completely shifts the conversation. It's not about revolution, it's about corrosion, like rust. So if we look at the big lessons they distilled from all this, regardless of their background, their country, what were the absolute critical, non-negotiable points they really wanted the audience to take away?
Yeah, they really hammered home 3 core lessons, it seemed. First, on leadership. It's needed today. They emphasized it's not necessarily charisma, but actually humility and a real commitment to upholding the limits of your own power. Strong leaders, the argument went, they reinforce institutions. They don't just override them when it's convenient.
Okay, humility and leadership. What was the second point? Second, preserving democratic values. And here, the focus felt really tactical. They insisted that just, believing democracy isn't enough. Citizens need to understand and actively defend the technical bits. Things like electoral transparency, judicial independence, and the mechanisms that actually make democracy work on the ground.
Got it. Understand and defend the machinery.
Exactly. And the third point, which speaks right to where this dialogue was held, was this universal agreement on the vital role of education. And they didn't just mean basic literacy. They meant education that fosters critical thinking, a deep understanding of governance. Basically, ensuring the next generation is equipped to spot and resist that administrative coup we were just talking about. An engaged, informed citizenry is the ultimate backstop against institutional decay.
Which brings us perfectly to our final section. Miami-Dade College's own commitment here. Why does an academic institution, especially one like MDC, which is so deeply woven into the civic fabric of Miami, why host an event like this? It's got to be more than just getting prestige points. Exactly right. Yeah. MDC wasn't just, providing a room and some coffee. They were actively reaffirming their own role in this whole geopolitical picture. This dialogue, it seems to serve at least 3 specific strategic functions for the college, going way beyond just simple education.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, fostering open discourse. Look, Miami is arguably the most important hub for political activity related to the Americas outside of maybe Washington, D.C. So by hosting these really diverse, influential, sometimes opposing voices, the college deliberately creates this kind of neutral, protected space. A place where these high-stakes conversations can actually happen, maybe without the same pressures you'd find in a formal diplomatic setting.
A safe harbor for difficult conversations. Makes sense. Second,
the explicit goal of empowering future leaders. Imagine being a student there, watching a former president and maybe a Nobel laureate debate the specific legal steps needed to keep a judiciary independent. That provides a level of practical insight, of training almost, that no textbook can possibly replicate. It makes theoretical civics feel immediate, like a real-world challenge you might face.
Yeah, it turns theory into something tangible. And the third function.
Third, it positions the college, very visibly, as a recognized hub for international collaboration and civic engagement. It reinforces MDC's identity as this dynamic crossroads, bridging the academic world with the very practical world of policy and governance. An event like this doesn't just inform the students who attend. It attracts international notice, maybe potential funding for related research and programs down the line.
So it has ripple effects beyond the day itself.
Definitely. And the impact on the attendees, you could feel it. People left inspired, sure, but I think more importantly, they left with a much more complex, nuanced understanding of the challenges. They were able to connect these, abstract concepts of governance to the really hard one, sometimes painful realities shared by people who actually lived through making those decisions.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? I think it means this 2025 presidential dialogue wasn't just another event. It was like a critical shortcut, a shortcut to understanding the really complex state of democracy in the Western Hemisphere right now. It pulled together this incredible group, 9 former presidents, the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the former head of the OAS, not just to, talk about their wins, but to really lay bare the region's challenges and maybe offer a kind of roadmap for resisting this internal democratic erosion they discussed.
Indeed. And, this raises a really important question, something for you, the listener, to think about further. Given that the dialogue focused so intensely on institutional integrity and on education's role in building effective, non-corrupt leaders, think about this. When future leaders get the chance to engage directly, intensely, with these firsthand accounts of governance crises, hearing the tension, the dilemmas, how does that experience fundamentally change how they perceive democracy's vulnerabilities later on? Is the value of that direct, inspiring, maybe even unsettling engagement, that sense of real-world urgency, is it quantifiably greater than just studying political theory in a classroom? That's something worth mulling over.